A barren field in deep winter suddenly bursts into emerald green weeks before its time. This was the magic of the medieval water meadow, one of history's most overlooked agricultural mysteries. By the end of this, you will understand the lost engineering that could make a field defy the very seasons. We are going to uncover how farmers with simple tools mastered the flow of rivers and why such a brilliant system was ultimately forgotten. What forgotten ingenuity lies hidden in the landscapes we pass every day? That emerald green miracle was born from sheer necessity. For the common farmer, the turning of the seasons was not a beautiful cycle but a constant threat. Their lives were a precarious balancing act on land that was often exhausted and unyielding. The soil, depleted by generations of farming the same strips of land, offered little nourishment. A single harsh frost in spring could wipe out a newly sown field. A summer that was too dry would stunt the growth of barley and rye, while a summer that was too wet would rot the roots before they could mature. The window for growing food was terrifyingly short, leaving a long, lean winter where hunger was a familiar ghost in every cottage. Entire communities lived one bad harvest away from disaster. This was the relentless problem that haunted medieval Europe. How could you coax life from a landscape that seemed determined to remain barren? The answer would not come from fighting the land, but from a profound understanding of its hidden rhythms, from learning to dance with the water itself. The breakthrough came from watching the river's own habits. A farmer would have seen how, after a winter flood receded, certain patches of land were left covered in a thick, rich silt. Where the water had gently lain, the grass always returned stronger, greener, and far earlier than anywhere else. This was nature's own fertilizer, a gift deposited by the seasonal pulse of the waterways. But relying on a chance flood was a gamble no one could afford. The true innovation, the moment of genius, was asking a simple but revolutionary question. What if we could make this happen ourselves? What if we could command the flood? This was the shift from passive observation to active control, the birth of a technology that would reshape the landscape. The first person to dig a small channel, diverting a trickle of water from a stream onto a waiting field, was conducting a radical experiment. We will never know their name. They were likely a common farmer, a person whose life depended on reading the subtle signs of the earth and water. Their tools were simple, perhaps just a spade and a strong back, but their idea was profound. They realized that water was not just a threat to be drained away, it was a resource to be carefully guided. This was not about fighting the river, but about becoming its partner. By creating their own miniature, controlled floods, they could deliver that life-giving silt exactly where and when it was needed most. They were no longer just cultivators of the land, they were becoming its architects. A functioning water meadow was a masterpiece of subtle engineering, a landscape designed to breathe with the seasons. At its heart lay a simple but brilliant network of channels, each with a very specific job to do. Think of it like the circulatory system of a living body. The main river or stream was the powerful heart, the source of all the water and the rich silt it carried. From this heart, the farmers dug carefully sloped channels called carriers. These were the main arteries, designed to carry water away from the river at a gentle, controlled pace. They never rushed or cut deeply into the land. Instead, they meandered along the highest points of the meadow, their purpose being to distribute life, not to drain it away. From these carrier channels, a finer network spread out like a web of tiny veins. These smaller channels, sometimes just shallow grooves in the earth, were spaced close together across the entire field. Their job was to let the water seep out slowly, blanketing the meadow in a thin, even sheet. This was the controlled flood. It was not a destructive deluge, but a deliberate, shallow bath that would warm the soil and deposit its nourishing silt. And just as a body needs veins to return blood to the heart, the meadow needed drains. These ditches were dug along the lowest points of the land, waiting to gather the water after it had done its work. They guided the now cooler water away, pulling it back towards the river downstream. This constant, gentle cycle of irrigation and drainage is what turned a barren field into an early spring paradise. It was a system of perfect balance, a testament to an understanding that we have largely lost. This master control point was the main sluice gate, known in some regions as a clough. It stood as the single most important piece of technology in the entire meadow, the definitive lever of power. Picture a massive gate built from heavy, waterlogged timbers, so dense and strong they could withstand the immense pressure of a swollen winter river. These wooden structures were often bound and reinforced with bands of wrought iron, a testament to the sheer force they were designed to harness. The clough was not a suggestion to the river, it was a command. When the farmer lifted this gate, even just a few inches, they were not simply letting water in. They were diverting a portion of the river's lifeblood, unleashing a controlled torrent into the waiting carrier channels. This was the moment of transformation. With the turn of a winch or the heave of a lever, a farmer could decide the fate of an entire season's growth. It was the ultimate tool for a partnership with nature, allowing a single person to orchestrate a miniature flood on demand. The water did not flow randomly anymore, it flowed by design. This gate was the physical embodiment of that ancient, revolutionary question, the tool that gave a human being direct authority over the element of water. The design of these carrier channels was where theory met the earth. A farmer did not simply dig a trench straight from the river. That would have been disastrous. Instead, they became masters of subtlety, reading the land like a map. The channels had to follow the natural contours of the meadow, tracing a path that was almost invisible to the untrained eye. This was not about forcing the landscape to obey, but about working in harmony with its existing slopes and dips. By following these gentle curves, the water would maintain its flow with almost no effort, guided by gravity alone. The key to this entire system was the channel's gradient, its precise and gentle slope. Getting this angle right was a matter of survival. If the channel was dug too steeply, the water would rush through with violent force. It would tear at the earth, scouring out the channel bed and washing away the precious, fertile silt it was meant to deliver. The life-giving water would become a destructive torrent. But the opposite error was just as dangerous. If the gradient was too shallow, the water's forward momentum would simply die. It would pool and stagnate, growing cold and starved of oxygen. In this stagnant state, the water would chill the soil it was meant to warm, and without movement, it could even become a breeding ground for rot and disease, killing the very grass they sought to encourage. Achieving that perfect, gentle slope required an incredible eye for the land. There were no laser levels or transit tools, just generations of accumulated wisdom passed from one farmer to the next. They were engineering an entire ecosystem, one careful shovel of earth at a time. But that gentle sheet of water needed a landscape to receive it. The meadow itself was not flat. If you could have looked down from above, you would have seen a field sculpted into long, parallel waves of earth, a pattern known as ridge and furrow. This was the final, brilliant piece of the puzzle. The furrows, those long, shallow troughs running between the raised ridges, became a network of miniature canals. As the water seeped from the carrier channels, it would fill these furrows first. From there, it would gently spill over and soak evenly into the raised ridges on either side. This ensured that every single inch of soil received its share of the warm, silt-rich water. No spot was missed, no patch remained dry. The system was one of perfect, democratic distribution. And when it was time to drain the meadow, this same pattern performed a second vital function. As the sluice gate was closed and the water's inflow stopped, gravity took over. The excess water would naturally flow back down into the furrows, which now acted as tiny drainage ditches. These furrows guided the cooler water efficiently toward the main drains, pulling it away from the grass roots. This rapid drainage was the key to preventing waterlogging. It kept the soil aerated and warm, creating the ideal, well-drained bed for the grass to explode into its famously early and lush growth. The ridge and furrow system was a perfect two-phase machine, designed for both the flood and the ebb, a testament to how every element of the water meadow worked in harmonious balance. With the entire system in place, the final secret lay in the calendar. Operating a water meadow was not about constant irrigation, it was about a few perfectly timed interventions. The most critical of these was the winter flood, a practice known as floating the meadows. This was not an act of desperation, but one of profound strategy. As the deep cold of winter set in and the ground grew hard, the farmer would make his move. He would go to the main sluice gate and with a great heave, open it just enough to let a shallow, steady stream of water flow from the river into the carrier channels. This water would then spread across the field in that thin, deliberate sheet, covering the dormant grass completely. At first glance, flooding a field in the dead of winter seems counterintuitive, even destructive. But the effect was pure magic. That flowing layer of water acted as a protective blanket over the grass roots sleeping beneath the soil. It insulated them from the killing bite of the frost. While other fields were locked in solid ice, the grass in the water meadow was kept just above freezing, safe and secure in its liquid cocoon. But the water did more than just protect, it also nourished. The river water was never clean in the modern sense. It was rich with suspended life. It carried a fine, mineral-laden silt scraped from the riverbanks upstream, a natural fertilizer that had been traveling for miles. As this water slowly moved across the meadow, it would gently deposit this precious silt particle by particle onto the field. This was a free, automatic top dressing, far richer than any manure a farmer could spread himself. The grass roots, kept warm and awake by the water, would begin to absorb these nutrients long before the spring thaw. They were being fed a continuous, gentle meal throughout the winter. Then, as the days began to lengthen and the first hints of warmth returned to the air, the farmer would close the sluice gate. He would drain the meadow, pulling that insulating blanket of water away. The result was almost immediate. The soil, now thoroughly warmed and supercharged with nutrients, responded with explosive force. The grass surged to life, turning a vibrant emerald green weeks, sometimes even a full month before the surrounding pastures showed any sign of growth. This timing was everything. That head start on the grazing season was not a mere convenience, it was a matter of survival for the entire community. It meant the livestock, often weak and thin after a long winter, could be turned out to graze on fresh, nutrient-rich grass much earlier. This early feed restored the health of the animals more quickly and reduced the need for the precious stores of hay that had to last until midsummer. A successful floating could mean the difference between a thriving herd and a struggling one, between a surplus and a shortage. The farmer who mastered this art held the power to stretch the growing season, to bend the rules of nature not through force, but through a deep and respectful understanding of water, earth, and time. How many other such subtle, powerful rhythms have we forgotten in our rush for more immediate solutions? This precise film of water was the heart of the floating art. A farmer did not simply unleash the river and walk away. The goal was never a deep, stagnant pond, but a continuous, shallow sheet no deeper than the height of your hand, moving with a barely perceptible flow across the entire meadow. Achieving this required a watchful, almost meditative presence. He would stand by the main sluice, his hand on the winch, making tiny adjustments to the gate's height based on the subtlest of cues. He was reading the water's story in its color, its speed, and the sound it made as it poured into the carrier channel. A change in the river's own level upstream, a sudden heavy rainfall, or even a shift in the wind could alter the entire equation. If the flow was too strong, the water would rush through the channels and scour the field, carving gullies instead of gently bathing it. If the flow was too weak, the water would stall and begin to cool, losing its insulating power and risking stagnation. This was a 24-hour vigil during the critical first days of a flood. The farmer might send his son to watch a distant part of the meadow, signaling back with a raised arm or a shout if the water was pooling or flowing incorrectly. It was a dance with a partner that never slept, a constant recalibration of force and direction. This intimate knowledge was not written in any manual. It was a living science passed from a father to his children through years of shared labor and quiet observation at the water's edge. They learned to feel the right flow in their bones, to judge the perfect cover by the way the water barely submerged the winter grass. To master the float was to hold a fragile piece of spring in your hands, knowing that a single misjudgment could let the winter cold back in or wash the entire season's promise away. How many such quiet arts built on a lifetime of sensory knowledge have vanished from the world without a trace? That river water was far more than just a liquid blanket. Its true power lay in what it carried, a hidden cargo of fertility gathered from across the entire watershed. Every drop was a rich soup of dissolved life, teeming with invisible nutrients and fine, suspended particles of silt. This silt was the secret ingredient, nature's own perfect fertilizer, delivered on a schedule and for free. Picture the journey of a single silt particle. It might start as a tiny fragment of rock worn away from a distant hillside by rain, or it could be a piece of decayed leaf or animal matter from a forest floor miles upstream. The flowing current of the river would pick it up and carry it along, holding it in suspension. For miles and miles, this particle would travel, gathering minerals and nutrients along the way, becoming a microscopic treasure chest of fertility. This was the river's constant, silent work, scraping, collecting, and transporting the very essence of life from the highlands to the lowlands. The medieval farmer, by diverting this water, was tapping into that vast natural distribution system. He was harvesting the wealth of an entire landscape and concentrating it onto his single field. The moment that silt-laden water left the fast-moving river and entered the wide, gentle expanse of the carrier channels, its journey began to slow. As it seeped out into the meadow, spreading into that thin, deliberate sheet, it lost even more of its speed and energy, and this is where the magic happened. Water can only carry a load when it has the force to keep it aloft. As it slows down, it must let go. The heavier particles of silt and organic matter, no longer suspended by the current, began to sink. They drifted gently down through the shallow water, settling like a fine, dark dust onto every blade of dormant grass and every inch of waiting soil. With every single flooding cycle, this process repeated, adding another paper-thin layer of the richest topsoil imaginable. It was an automatic, continuous fertilization that required no back-breaking labor to spread manure, no costly purchases of amendments. The river did all the work, gifting the meadow with a fresh coat of fertility each winter. This was not just watering the grass, it was feeding the very earth it grew from. Can you think of any modern fertilizer delivery system so elegant, so effortless, and so perfectly in tune with the natural world? Yet for all its life-giving power, that watery blanket could not remain forever. Draining the meadow was the second, equally vital half of the cycle. After days or sometimes weeks of floating, the farmer would return to the main sluice gate. With a decisive heave, he would lower the heavy timber back into place, severing the meadow's connection to the river. The sudden silence was profound. The gurgle of incoming water ceased, and the system began its final, crucial transformation. This was not a passive event, but the activation of a carefully planned escape route for the water. All across the field, the network of drainage ditches that had lain dormant now sprang into action. Guided by the same subtle gradient that had brought the water in, the shallow sheet began to move. It trickled from the raised ridges down into the waiting furrows, which now functioned as miniature rivers in reverse. These furrows channeled the water into the larger drainage ditches, which ran along the lowest points of the land. From there, the water flowed steadily away, pulled by gravity back to the main river downstream. This was not a slow seepage, but a rapid and efficient evacuation. Within a day or two, a field that had been a shallow lake would transform into a firm, damp pasture. The speed of this drainage was the final masterstroke. As the water retreated, it pulled cool, heavy air away with it. The dark, wet soil was now fully exposed to the weak but strengthening spring sun. Without that insulating layer of water, the earth could absorb the sun's warmth directly, and it did so with astonishing speed. The soil temperature would rise dramatically, creating a warm seedbed that shocked the dormant grass roots into immediate and explosive growth. At the same time, the rapid drainage pulled fresh air down into the soil, aerating the root zone and invigorating the plants. The grass did not just grow, it surged, erupting in a vibrant, almost unbelievable emerald green that defied the still, barren landscape around it. This was the entire point of the exercise, the miraculous payoff for months of careful labor. That sudden burst of lush growth was the farmer's reward for understanding that to truly give life, you must know not only how to bring the water in, but also how to command it to leave. The result of this careful orchestration was nothing short of a miracle. While the rest of the countryside remained locked in the dull browns and grays of late winter, the water meadow would already be a thick emerald carpet. This was the early bite, a term that fails to capture its true life-giving power. This was not just early grass, it was incredibly nutritious grass, supercharged by the silt and kept tender by the constant moisture. For the animals emerging from a long winter in cramped barns, this was a feast. They were let out onto this lush pasture weeks before they otherwise could have been, their thin bodies immediately beginning to recover on the fresh, easily digestible feed. This single change created a virtuous cycle that uplifted the entire farm. The livestock regained their strength and health far more quickly, which meant better milk yields for the dairy and stronger animals for the plow. Just as importantly, the early grazing meant the farm's precious stores of winter hay, which had to last until midsummer, were preserved. Every day the animals fed themselves on that green carpet was a day they did not consume the dwindling haystack. And as those animals grazed, they returned the favor. Their manure, rich and potent, was deposited directly back onto the meadow, further fertilizing it for the next growth cycle. This manure was also a resource that could be collected and spread on other, less fortunate fields, boosting the productivity of the entire holding. One cleverly managed meadow, therefore, did not just feed a few cows. It strengthened the entire agricultural system, creating a ripple effect of health and abundance from a single, shimmering green field. But such a sophisticated system could not be built or managed by just anyone. The creation of a water meadow required a significant investment of labor and materials, immediately raising a question about the medieval world. Who possessed the resources and authority to reshape the very land? The answer reveals a deep divide in the social fabric of the time. For a common yeoman farmer, the dream of a water meadow was often just that, a dream. The sheer physical work of digging the channels and building the sluice gates was immense, a task that could take a single family years to complete on top of their other back-breaking duties. And this was not just simple digging, it was skilled, precise work where a single misplaced channel could ruin the entire endeavor. Then there was the problem of the water source itself. A small farmer's field might not even border a suitable river, or if it did, his neighbors upstream or downstream could object to his diversion of the shared water. The legal right to use flowing water was a tangled web of ancient custom and manorial law. More often than not, the power to command a river was held by the lord of the manor. It was the manor estates, with their vast resources of land, capital, and most importantly, labor, that became the primary architects of the largest and most productive water meadows. The lord could muster teams of workers, command the necessary timber and iron for the sluices, and enforce the water rights needed to make the system function. This was not a technology for the poor or the socially powerless. It was a tool of agricultural intensification for those who already controlled the landscape. Yet, even within this rigid structure, a new kind of expert began to emerge, a man who held the secrets of the water in his hands. On the great estates, the management of the flooding became a specialized, year-round occupation. These men were known as drowners. A drowner was more than just a laborer. He was a hydrologist and a meteorologist long before those titles existed. His knowledge was entirely practical, learned through a lifetime of watching the sky, feeling the wind, and reading the subtle changes in the water's flow. He knew exactly when to float the meadows based on the hardness of the winter frost. He could predict how a coming rainstorm would swell the river and adjust the sluice gates hours in advance. The drowner's calendar was dictated not by saints' days, but by the needs of the grass and the temperament of the water. His value to the estate was incalculable, for a single mistake in timing could drown the grass in silt or let in a killing frost. This created a fascinating social paradox. Here was a common laborer, yet he possessed a form of power that even the lord of the manor did not. The lord owned the meadow, but the drowner understood its heartbeat. He held the keys to its productivity, making him a respected and crucial figure in the rural community. The success of the entire system, therefore, rested on a fragile alliance between the lord's resources and the drowner's irreplaceable, hard-won wisdom. How many other such specialized roles, vital to their time, have faded into complete obscurity? The tools that carved this watery landscape were as simple as they were effective. A farmer's primary instrument was the spade, a wooden shovel tipped with a heavy iron blade. This was not the light, curved spade of a modern gardener. It was a tool built for pure power, designed to cut through tough, root-bound earth and move heavy, wet soil for hours on end. With this single tool, a team of workers could dig the entire network of carriers and drains, shaping the land one heavy scoop at a time. But digging the channels was only the first step. The gradient, that perfect, gentle slope, had to be precise. To achieve this, they used a tool of beautiful simplicity, a wooden sledge. This was essentially a heavy, flat platform of wood, sometimes weighted down with stones. After a section of channel was dug, this sledge would be dragged along its length. The dragging action did two things at once. It smoothed out any bumps or irregularities in the channel bed, and the immense weight of the sledge compacted the soil beneath it. This compaction was vital. It created a smooth, hard surface that resisted erosion. Without it, the flowing water would quickly scour the channel, carving it deeper and ruining the carefully calculated gradient. The sledge turned a rough-dug trench into an engineered watercourse, a miniature canal ready for its work. Maintaining the mighty sluice gate required its own specialized kit. The gate itself, made of massive timbers, was hung on enormous iron hinges that had to be kept free of rust and debris. A heavy mallet and iron wedges were used to adjust the gate's seating, ensuring a tight seal when closed. And to lift the immense weight of the waterlogged gate, a simple but powerful winch or a wooden lever was essential. This was not high technology in our modern sense. It was the application of basic principles, leverage, weight, and cutting edges, mastered through repetition and shared knowledge. The real ingenuity was not in the tools themselves, but in the vision to use them in concert, to see a network of water and earth where others saw only a field and a river. This was engineering on a human scale, where the strength of a person's back and the sharpness of an iron blade could redirect the flow of life itself. The true power of this technology revealed itself not in isolated fields, but in entire landscapes remade. Nowhere was this more evident than in the chalk stream valleys of southern England, a region steeped in ancient history known as Wessex. Here, the rivers flowing from the porous chalk downs were perfect for the purpose, running clear and cold with a remarkably consistent flow throughout the year. In these valleys, the water meadow was not a solitary experiment but a dominant feature of the land. If you had flown over the River Avon or the River Wye in the 18th century, you would have seen a breathtaking sight. The flat valley floors were not a single homogeneous green, but an intricate mosaic of emerald and brown, a geometric quilt of countless individual meadows, each laced with its own gleaming network of carriers and drains. This was agriculture elevated to an art form, a planned and managed ecosystem that stretched for miles. Every twist of the river was harnessed, with carrier channels running like silver threads along the contours, feeding one meadow after another in a cascading sequence of fertility. This was not just a collection of successful farms, it was a civilization built on controlled water. The transformation of these valleys into such highly productive land had a profound and direct impact on the people who lived there. A landscape that could produce an early and abundant grass crop could support more livestock, and more livestock meant more manure, more meat, and more wealth. This agricultural surplus was the foundation upon which thriving market towns like Salisbury were built. The prosperity of entire communities was literally rooted in the carefully managed flow of the chalk streams. The water meadows of Wessex became the engine room of a more resilient and prosperous local economy, allowing populations to grow and culture to flourish in a way that would have been impossible with traditional, rain-fed fields alone. It was a testament to how human ingenuity, when applied in harmony with nature, could sculpt not just a field but the destiny of a region. Yet the shimmering green fields of Wessex did not last forever. This brilliant system, perfected over generations, eventually faded from the land, leaving behind a profound historical mystery. Why would anyone abandon a technology that offered such a clear and powerful advantage? The answer lies in a perfect storm of change, a series of revolutions that made the old ways seem not just difficult but unnecessary. The first blow came from science and industry with the advent of artificial fertilizers. For centuries, the river's silt was the only reliable source of fertility most farmers had ever known. But in the 19th century, new chemical discoveries promised a different kind of magic. A farmer could now buy a bag of superphosphate or ammonium nitrate and spread it across his fields with far less effort than maintaining a network of channels. This was fertility in a sack, available on demand and independent of the river's flow. Suddenly, the year-round, back-breaking labor of cleaning ditches and managing sluice gates seemed like an antiquated burden. Why dance with a river when you could simply purchase growth? This new convenience came at a hidden cost, of course, severing the deep, cyclical connection between the farm and its natural watershed. But in the short term, the promise was irresistible. The second, equally powerful force was a revolution in law and land ownership, the Enclosure Acts. Water meadows were fundamentally communal organisms. Their channels often crossed multiple strips of land, and their operation required a shared understanding of water rights and a coordinated flooding schedule. The old medieval open field system, for all its inefficiencies, had fostered this communal knowledge, but enclosure privatized the landscape. It carved up the common fields into neat, hedged parcels owned by individual farmers. This new system prized independence and private profit over communal cooperation. The intricate web of carriers and drains, which had once served an entire community, now ran awkwardly across newly drawn property lines. A farmer who owned a single enclosed field might have no use for a carrier channel that began on his neighbor's land and ended on another's. The shared responsibility for maintenance fractured. The drowners, the keepers of the old wisdom, found their specialized knowledge no longer in demand. The new owners often saw the water channels not as arteries of life, but as ditches that wasted valuable planting space. One by one, the sluice gates were sealed for the last time. The carriers were filled in and the drains were blocked as the landscape was simplified for the age of machinery and chemicals. The knowledge of how to float a meadow, a science built over centuries, evaporated within a generation or two. It was a quiet catastrophe, the loss of a language for speaking with the land. What other profound wisdoms have we traded away for the sake of convenience and control? You can still find their ghosts if you know where to look. the lost water meadows of England have not completely vanished. They have simply faded back into the landscape, waiting for a detective's eye to spot their subtle traces. The first clue is written upon the earth itself, a pattern you can often feel with your feet even when you cannot see it clearly. This is the gentle, wave-like undulation of ridge and furrow. In an old pasture, you might walk across what seems like a perfectly flat field, only to notice a distinct rolling rhythm to your stride. Your feet will sink slightly into shallow troughs and rise over soft, rounded crests, often spaced about 6 or 7 yards apart. These are not natural formations, they are the fossilized footprints of medieval plowing, the very same ridges that once guided the life-giving water and then drained it away. From ground level, the pattern can be subtle, a mere whisper of the past, but from above, its logic becomes stunningly clear. In an aerial photograph, especially when the sun is low in the sky, the long, graceful curves of these ridges cast delicate shadows, revealing a beautiful, systematic fingerprint across the land. They look like the fossilized ribs of a giant serpent sleeping just beneath the soil. Another sign to search for is the network of channels, now often silted up and overgrown. Look for shallow, linear depressions running along the highest edge of a field, following the natural contour of the land. These are the remains of the carrier channels. They might now be just damp ditches filled with nettles and reeds, but their purposeful path is a dead giveaway. They never run straight, they always curve gently, tracing the land's own logic. And if you follow the low points of the field, you might find the corresponding drainage ditches, often deeper and more defined. The most exciting discovery of all is the sluice gate, or what remains of it. You are not looking for a standing structure, but for an earthwork. Search the spot where a carrier channel meets a riverbank. There you might find a raised, rectangular platform of earth, a sort of artificial mound, often with a gap in its center. This was the foundation that supported the massive timber and iron clow. Nearby, you might even find chunks of waterlogged wood or rusted iron fittings, silent witnesses to the last time a farmer stood on that spot and commanded the river to flow. Finding these clues is like learning to read a secret language, one that tells a story of water and human ingenuity written directly upon the land. This green miracle of England raises a compelling historical puzzle. Could such a sophisticated system truly have been confined to one corner of the medieval world? The answer is both yes and no. Across Europe, other cultures were also mastering the art of water management, but their solutions were born from different problems and landscapes. In the Low Countries of the Netherlands, farmers faced a constant, existential threat from the sea. Their response was the polder, a system of dikes and windmills designed to reclaim land from the water, to push it back and keep it out. This was a monumental feat of defensive engineering, a battle against the ocean to create dry ground where none existed before. Meanwhile, in the sun-drenched plains of northern Italy, the challenge was not winter cold but summer drought. Vast networks of irrigation channels, known as canali or rog, were dug to divert water from the Alps onto fields of wheat, rice, and other crops. These systems were designed for a long, hot growing season to deliver life-giving moisture when the rains failed. Both the polder and the Italian canal were brilliant, but they served a fundamentally different purpose than the English water meadow. They were about creating a stable environment for cultivation, either by conquering the water or by compensating for its absence. The English technique of floating, however, was not about stability. It was about manipulation. It was about using water not just as a resource, but as a tool to actively change the microclimate of a field, to accelerate the seasons themselves. The specific goal of flooding a meadow in the dead of winter to insulate the grass and force an early spring growth appears to be a uniquely English innovation. It was a response to a very particular set of circumstances, a cold, damp climate where the greatest agricultural limitation was the shortness of the grazing season. This was not a technology for creating land or fighting drought. It was a technology for stealing time. Why did this precise art flourish in England and not spread widely across the continent? Perhaps the answer lies in the specific combination of climate, geography, and the unique social structure of the English manor, which provided both the resources for such large-scale projects and the specialized labor, the drowners, to manage them. It seems the medieval water meadow was not just a piece of engineering, but a cultural artifact, a secret whispered between the chalk streams and the farmers who learned to listen. This leaves us with a profound historical silence. If the water meadow was such an advanced agricultural system, where are the instruction manuals? We have detailed medieval texts on everything from castle building to falconry, but the precise art of floating a meadow is almost entirely absent from the written record. The knowledge was considered too vital, too specific to a single piece of land to be entrusted to parchment. It lived instead as a living science, passed in strict secrecy from an experienced drowner to his chosen apprentice through years of shared labor. This was a master trade, as protected as that of a guild swordsmith or a cathedral glassmaker. Imagine the scene: an old man and a young one standing by the sluice gate in the biting cold of a January dawn. The master would not hand over a written list of rules. Instead, he would teach through sensation and observation. He would have the apprentice place a hand in the flowing water of the carrier channel, feeling for the exact temperature that signaled the river was ready to be tapped. He would point to the way the water barely rippled over the grass, demonstrating the perfect shallow sheet. He would teach the young man to read the color of the silt in the water, a shade that told of its richness. The apprentice learned to predict a coming frost by the ache in his own bones, and to anticipate a thaw by the scent of the wind. This was knowledge written not in ink, but in the body itself, a deep, sensory understanding of a specific river, a specific meadow, and a specific sky. The absence of manuals is not an accident, it is a testament to the nature of the craft. You could not write a single book to explain how to manage every water meadow in England, because each one had its own unique personality, its own subtle gradients and quirks of flow. What worked on the gentle river while I would have been a disaster on the faster flowing Stour. The drowner's true notebook was the landscape he tended, and his pen was the spade that constantly adjusted its contours. This reliance on oral tradition made the knowledge incredibly fragile. When the economic pressures of enclosure and artificial fertilizers made the drowners obsolete, their wisdom vanished within a generation or two. There was no library of forgotten books to rediscover. The techniques died with the last men who had stood watch through the long winter nights, their ears tuned to the whisper of water over earth. This is why the surviving physical evidence, the ghostly ridges and silted channels we can still walk today, are so precious. They are the only concrete record we have of this lost art, the silent, earthen scripture of a culture that chose to write its greatest secrets upon the land itself. The silence of the written record has not stopped us from hearing the whispers of the past. A new generation of detectives, armed not with spades but with scientific instruments, is now attempting to resurrect the water meadow. These are not mere restorations, they are full-scale experiments in time travel, conducted under the banner of experimental archaeology. The goal is simple yet profound: to rebuild a derelict system exactly as the medieval farmers would have, and then to test it to see if the old magic still works. Teams of historians, archaeologists, and hydrologists identify a long-abandoned meadow, its channels silted up and its sluice gate long since rotted away. Using old maps and the faint scars on the landscape as their guide, they carefully redig the carriers and the drains, rebuilding the sluice with period-appropriate materials. This is painstaking, muddy work, a physical echo of the labor that once defined these fields. But the true test comes on a cold winter morning when the team gathers at the newly built clough. With a collective heave, they lift the heavy timber gate, releasing a trickle of river water into the waiting channels. For the first time in over a century, the system is alive. The moment the water begins to flow, the experiment begins. This is where observation replaces speculation. Researchers place flow meters in the channels to capture the exact speed of the water. They drive stakes into the meadow at regular intervals, marked with precise measurements to track how much silt is deposited with each flooding cycle. They bury soil temperature probes next to the grass roots in both the floated meadow and a nearby control field. The data that comes back is a revelation. It confirms the ancient wisdom with cold, hard numbers. The experiments show that a perfectly managed sheet of water can raise the soil temperature by several critical degrees, creating a microclimate that genuinely defies the surrounding winter. The silt deposition measurements are even more startling. A single winter of controlled flooding can add a layer of new topsoil as thick as your fingernail, a rate of natural fertilization that would take decades to achieve otherwise. But the most convincing data appears months later in the spring. Side by side, the experimental water meadow and the control field present a stark contrast. The grass in the floated meadow surges to life a full 3 to 4 weeks earlier, and its growth is not just premature, it is measurably denser and richer in nutrients. These modern experiments do more than just verify old stories, they quantify the genius. They reveal the water meadow not as a quaint folklore, but as a highly efficient biological machine. Each successfully recreated flood is a conversation with a lost expert, a way of finally recording the secrets that the drowners never wrote down. What other lost efficiencies might we uncover by physically rebuilding the past? From our modern vantage point, the water meadow stands as a masterclass in sustainable design. This was a system that operated in a perfect closed loop, demanding nothing from outside its own watershed. Every input was natural and free, harvested from the river's own journey. The fertility came from the silt, a renewable resource constantly replenished by the landscape itself. The energy was gravity, and the engine was the seasonal rhythm of the water. Compare this to our modern dependence on artificial fertilizers, which require immense industrial processes and fossil fuels to produce and transport. The medieval farmer leveraged the ecosystem's own work, creating abundance without depleting the land. This was not just farming, it was a form of ecological partnership that modern agriculture is only now struggling to relearn. The system was also a powerful guardian against soil erosion. While modern fields can see their precious topsoil blown away by wind or washed away by rain, the water meadow actively built soil. Each winter flood deposited a new layer of silt, literally anchoring the earth in place and adding to its fertility year after year. The very act of floating protected the bare ground from the punishing impact of winter storms, cradling it in that gentle, insulating sheet of water. Beyond the field's edge, the benefits rippled outward. The network of carriers and drains created a mosaic of microhabitats, a man-made wetland ecosystem buzzing with life. These constantly moist channels became nurseries for insects, frogs, and aquatic plants. They offered water and shelter to birds and other small animals, increasing the local biodiversity in a way a simple, drained field never could. The farmer, in his quest for early grass, was unintentionally engineering a thriving wildlife sanctuary. Perhaps the most resonant lesson for our era of climate uncertainty is its intelligent water management. The system was a giant sponge for the entire valley. By slowing the flow of water across the land during wet winter months, it reduced the risk of destructive flooding downstream. It allowed water to percolate into the water table, recharging aquifers instead of racing away to the sea. Then, in the drier summer months, that stored groundwater would slowly release, maintaining the flow in the streams and providing a crucial buffer against drought. The water meadow managed the entire hydrological cycle with a subtlety we have since lost, treating water not as a problem to be disposed of, but as a precious resource to be carefully guided and stored within the landscape. In an age facing soil degradation, water scarcity, and biodiversity loss, the ghost of the drowned holds up a mirror. His simple, elegant solutions challenge our reliance on brute force and chemical intervention, asking us if we might still learn from a time when farming worked with the land's own logic. The shimmering green grass was only the most visible reward. A functioning water meadow was a multi-purpose hydraulic engine, and its potential extended far beyond pasturing livestock. Those same channels that delivered warmth and silt in winter could be repurposed for other ingenious tasks. During a deep, hard freeze, a farmer might deliberately flood a single, level field to a slightly greater depth. Overnight, the still water would transform into a perfect, smooth sheet of ice. This created a safe, controlled space for ice skating, a rare winter pleasure in a time when venturing onto a frozen river was a deadly gamble. But this was more than simple recreation. The same icy surface provided a swift, efficient pathway for sliding heavy loads of firewood or harvested timber across the estate, turning a season of stillness into one of unexpected mobility. The water channels themselves were miniature ecosystems, thriving with life that did not go unnoticed. The slow-moving, silt-rich water in the carriers was an ideal nursery for small fish and aquatic insects. It would have been a simple matter to introduce young eels or freshwater fish like tench, creating a self-sustaining larder that required no additional feeding. The edges of these channels, constantly damp and fertile, attracted ducks, geese, and other waterfowl. These birds would not only graze on the grass and aquatic plants, but could also be encouraged to nest, providing a steady supply of eggs, meat, and valuable feathers. A well-managed meadow was not a single-use tool. It was an integrated, living farmstead where water, earth, plants, and animals all supported one another in a complex web of mutual benefit. The same engineering that coaxed spring from the heart of winter could also fill a stew pot or clear a woodland. How many other such hidden efficiencies have we designed out of our modern, simplified landscapes? This quiet, patient work on the riverbank was an act of engineering every bit as sophisticated as building a cathedral. We often picture the medieval farmer as a figure bowed by toil, a simple peasant guided by superstition and tradition. The water meadow shatters that illusion. The minds that designed these landscapes were not just cultivators, they were intuitive hydraulic engineers. They possessed a profound, practical grasp of the very principles that would later be formalized in textbooks. They understood topography, reading the subtle dips and rises of a field to predict how water would flow across it. They mastered a form of fluid dynamics, knowing that the speed of the water determined whether it would carry life-giving silt or carve out a destructive gully. They were soil scientists who could differentiate between types of silt by their color and texture, knowing which would best nourish the grass. Their canvas was the land itself, and their tools were gravity and observation. They did not have the equations, but they had the results. They knew that to slow water down, you had to widen its path and reduce its gradient. They understood that standing water would grow cold and stagnant, while moving water would retain its warmth. Every decision, from the curve of a carrier channel to the precise height of the sluice gate, was a calculated application of physical laws. This was not guesswork. It was a deep, accumulated wisdom born from generations of watching, testing, and learning from both success and catastrophic failure. They were not just working the land, they were reprogramming it, building a machine made of earth and water that could outperform nature's own schedule. How many other such master engineers have we overlooked simply because they worked with soil instead of steel? That same deep understanding of water and soil is now being sought by a new generation of farmers. Faced with modern crises of soil degradation and water scarcity, agricultural pioneers are looking back, realizing that the medieval farmer possessed a wisdom we desperately need to reclaim. The principles of the water meadow are not just historical curiosities, they are the bedrock of a movement called regenerative agriculture. This approach seeks to work with natural cycles rather than against them, and the drowned meadows of Old England offer a stunningly effective blueprint. The core idea of harvesting fertility from the local watershed, for instance, is being rediscovered. Instead of relying solely on manufactured fertilizers that require immense energy to produce, modern land managers are building systems that capture silt and organic matter from runoff before it is lost. They create swales, which are essentially modern versions of the carrier channels, shallow ditches dug along the contour of a field to slow water down, let it sink into the earth and deposit its precious sediment. This mimics the Meadows' genius for building soil from within the system, not from a distant factory. The medieval focus on water as a thermal blanket is also finding new relevance. In an era of increasingly unpredictable frosts, some vineyards and orchards are using deliberate, shallow irrigation to protect delicate buds from a late spring freeze, applying the same insulating principle that kept medieval grass roots safe. Even the concept of the ridge and furrow is being revived. Farmers are using tools to shape their fields into broad, gentle undulations that capture rainwater, reduce erosion, and create microclimates, just as the old patterns did. This is not about nostalgia, it is about resilience. The medieval system was a closed loop, a sustainable cycle that strengthened itself year after year. Our modern, linear model of taking from the land and then trying to replace what was lost with chemicals is proving to be fragile. The water meadow stands as a powerful testament to a different way, a circular logic where every element supports another. Its ghost challenges us to see our landscapes not as factories for extraction, but as living systems to be nurtured. What other ancient secrets for a sustainable future are still hidden in the forgotten folds of the land, waiting for us to listen? From a barren winter field to a vibrant spring pasture, the journey of the water meadow was a triumph of human ingenuity. It began with a simple, powerful problem: the desperate need for food in a world haunted by hunger. The solution was not to conquer nature, but to collaborate with it, to build a partnership with the river itself. The mighty sluice gate gave a single farmer the authority to command a miniature flood, unleashing the river's life force onto his land. A carefully engineered network of channels carved with a perfect gentle slope then distributed that water in a thin, even sheet. This was not a random deluge, but a deliberate bath, timed with the deep cold of winter to insulate the grass roots and deposit a rich, fertilizing silt. The result was that legendary early bite, a surge of emerald green grass weeks ahead of schedule, a bounty that strengthened livestock, preserved winter stores, and secured the health of an entire community. This entire system, from the heft of the timber clow to the silent, patient work of the drowner, was a masterpiece of sustainable design. It is a story written not in parchment but in the very soil. And that is your invitation. The next time you walk through a seemingly ordinary field, slow down. Let your feet feel for the gentle, wave-like undulations of ridge and furrow. Look for the shallow, overgrown ditches tracing the contours of the land. Search the riverbank for the raised earthen platform where a sluice gate once stood. These are the ghosts of a forgotten intelligence, the subtle clues left behind by the landscape architects of the past. Becoming a detective of your own local history can unlock these secrets, revealing the hidden logic and profound wisdom that still lies just beneath our feet, waiting only for a curious eye to see it once again.